Western sanctions against Chinese banks for doing business with Russia have finally started to really put the screws on Russia. And is Russia and its institutions now resorting to finger pointing? But do they have a lifeline in an unlikely Western ally? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is the Bank of Russia is pointing fingers at exporters, or rather importers, asking them to please stop trading in Chinese yuan. Of course, the trading sector is saying, Bank of Russia, it's your job to make sure we have sufficient foreign reserves to conduct our import and export transactions. This sounds like a boring story, but I promise you it's not, because it's a sign that Russian institutions are beginning to turn on each other. Russia's central bank is actually saying, begging, really is the right word, Russian corporations to stop asking for loans of yuan. All right, this is after the two biggest lenders in the country, two of the biggest banks, urged the Russian central bank to take action to alleviate the fact that the whole country is out of Chinese currency. Now, why do they need it? Well, as we've talked about on this channel, for Russia to import those dual-use items. These are not military items per se. They are civilian items that can easily be converted by Russia to military use. Think, for example, high-end optics or cameras and transmitters. Cameras and transmitters could be used for, to put security cameras on houses, but they could also be used to put FPV drones onto FPV drones and broadcast that camera feed back. So those kind of dual use items are commonly purchased by Russia from China. The issue is, of course, that China doesn't want payment in Russian rubles. Just like, what would you do if someone if your employer paid your salary with a stack of rubles? You'd say, I can't use this. I can't buy anything at my store. Most importantly, I can't pay the taxes on my salary with these rubles. So these exporters or these importers in Russia have said, all right, we need to purchase yuan here in Russia so we can pay these Chinese companies that we've purchased from. There's just a problem. No one has any yuan anymore. All right. Now, Russia's major banks have said, listen, since late 2023, these banks have been lending a lot of yuan because that's the only trading partner Russia has right now. So it's been loaning out yuan right and left. The problem is, when you purchase drone parts with yuan, you have drone parts, but the yuan has left your country and returned to China. And without a corresponding export, there's no yuan coming in. So here's the problem. There's a reduction in liquid assets of the currency. And so the head of major Russian state banks have said, listen, we've done all we can to loan out yuan, right? We're charging an arm and a leg, right? Borrowing rates passing 200%, and yet still traders, import-export companies are still begging for more yuan. It's absolutely unbelievable. But the problem is, of course, Chinese banks, one, they don't really want yuan anyway, but also you can just only run a trade deficit for so long. Now, normally, what would happen in a normal country if you had this sort of trade imbalance is that a different third party that was importing Russian goods, again, let's say someone who's purchasing Russian oil, right? The Europeans. Well, Russia would just go, listen, we need yuan. We're selling this oil and we're getting like rubles, or we're selling this oil to Europeans. They'd say, listen, we're just going to go out on the open market. We're going to use the currencies that we have and buy yuan so we can make these loans happen. Too easy. Problem is, they can't go onto the open market. They only have each other. They have China and they have Russia, and that's it. And when these sanctions really starting to bite, this is why we talk about it, is these sanctions, ultimately, there's not really a way around it. There are limited ways, but they're going to have scaling issues, right? Again, the gap in yuan has been covered so far by the Russian central bank via what it calls a swap instrument. Again, its ability to go out on the open market and be like, listen, I got a bunch of euros. You guys got any yuan you'll sell me? But as sanctions bite more and more, other parties go, no, dude, we won't sell you any yuan. And that is going to start to really, it's going to mean eventually that either there's two options. The first is that Chinese firms accept something other than yuan in payment, like a cryptocurrency or gold. But the other option is the Chinese firms say, listen, we won't sell you goods in a currency we can't use. Rubles aren't worth the paper they're printed on. And Reuters is increasing, and we're seeing the market look that way. The ruble's dropping 5% against yuan earlier this week. And the Central Bank of Russia said it's going to shrink its daily yuan sales, with central bankers selling just $200 million a day. That's down last month from $7.3 billion. So again, is this going to collapse the Russian military overnight? No. But what it's going to mean is that the Russian military that's already thin on equipping is going to start to look even thinner, right? They're going to be harder for them, particularly to get those kind of sophisticated items that Russia needs, right? They talk about the escalating payment scuffles, right? But this is the reality, that Russia has essentially starting to experience yuanification of its economy. And the problem is, this is exactly what China wants. Of course, they want to turn Russia into a vassal state. And because it's so desperate in to fuel its war that it's sort of trapped itself in, it may just have to accept it. But they may have an out. But before we talk about that, I want to mention that if you want access to uncensored combat footage, the kind that YouTube just won't let me show you, and you want to support the channel because, as you guys know, a lot of influencers are apparently for sale. Governments, corporations, the Kremlin, for example, to name one, is always looking to buy influencers, but I'm not for sale. The reason is because I have Combat Vet News. Combat Vet News is my site. It's not even Patreon. It's my own version of Patreon. I host it. I developed it. I am the sole owner of it. And that means that if you guys want to support me and make sure I can do this independently, give the real information, the real analysis here, and not shill for some company or state, then you can support me. You want twice a week uncensored combat videos? Specialist tier. You want that plus a weekly Q&A where you can submit any question you want. My time in Afghanistan, my favorite food, what do I think is going to happen with FPV drone tech? Is Ukraine going to lose Pokrovsk? Anything. That's a lieutenant tier. And if you want all that, plus the by name shoutouts, the colonel tier. The link is in the description. Check it out. Makes a big difference. Okay, so who or what is bailing out Russia? The answer is India. Russia has covertly drafted plans to purchase goods from India. And I want to make a note here. The Financial Times reported. You may be thinking, that's some interesting timing. That covertly drafted plans were leaked to the Financial Times the same day that the head of the CIA and MI6 had a large press conference where they talked about the unprecedented threats to the West. This is an interesting little scoop because it's publicly humiliating something India really wanted to keep under wraps, because India wants to position itself as both a Western ally and a pro-Russian figure. Because remember, they're trying to counterbalance China, their regional rival. And the West is happy to help them do it. But they also worry when they see Russia cozying up to China. So they want to cozy up to Russia too. Problem is, these plans to covertly purchase goods from India are pretty extensive. Because remember, just like the Russian central bank ran out of yuan because there was so much importing happening from China, there's been so little importing from India that they actually have too many Indian rupees sitting in their central bank. They got to get rid of them. And so Russia's trade ministry, or rather the Consortium for Foreign Economic Activity and International Interstate Cooperation in Industry, was asked to develop a plan by Putin to how to develop critical electronic components in India. Right? Because they have rupees, they need electronics. How do they get it? Well, the answer is the consortium came up with a scheme where rupees would be used to essentially trade rupees for rubles in a closed payment system between India. That would create a steady flow of electronic equipment originally bought in the West, then resold to India, then resold again to Russia. This, of course, Russia could also literally directly start to build Indian factories, literally Russian war factories in India, to build the things it needs. India, of course, salivating over the fact that it can just simply get a huge amount of capital into their country for the difficult task of reselling Western electronics, and also have a bunch of electronics factories stood up, allowing it to further compete with China. It's too good a deal for even India to pass up, unless, of course, it would damage relations with the West. And by this document leaking, it may have done just that. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Please subscribe. Huge thank you to James Jerling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Nitzen, Bastian Himmerling, Yanko Georgiev, Dale McCombs, James Ola, and Henry Roussier, right? As well as Pija Taruru and Daniel M. and Idaskal, all our new Colonel tier members and all our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do this without you guys. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.